Senator Rubio.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. So I want to go back to this issue of access to the dollar. I think I saw a recent example cited in the blog, and I wanted to get some pretty clear understanding about how this would or would not work. So I think the example that was used is a Swiss company who sells a product of any kind to Iran. Now, I think the president and everyone's been pretty clear what they're not allowed to do. They're not allowed to go through a U.S. bank to turn the rial into a dollar and then the dollar into a Swiss franc. That's pretty clear, and I think that's been outlined. But here's what I want to get at, and that is an alternative mechanism. And this outlines an alternative mechanism, and I want to understand whether or not this alternative mechanism is allowed or not under this agreement. The way it would work under this scenario that was played out is that the U.S. would allow a general license for a U.S. bank to provide dollars to a non-U.S. clearinghouse somewhere overseas. And then what would happen is that Iran would pay a European bank in rials. The European bank would then exchange those rials for euros. It would then go to that clearinghouse and swap the euro out for a dollar, bring the dollar back and exchange the dollars for Swiss francs, and then pay that to the Swiss company. Is that sort of arrangement something that would be allowed under the agreement?
I'm not sure. I would have to check, because if it doesn't touch a U.S. bank, if it doesn't touch the U.S. financial system, because what our sanctions legislation has done, and what we have been able to accomplish in terms of limiting Iran's access to our larger financial system, is we have not permitted U-turn authorization. In other words, no exchange of dollars inside the U.S. financial system, and we have not allowed it access to our larger financial system. But I do not know, again, I'm not a financial expert here. I'd have to check with Treasury. But I do not know if what you just described is authorized under.
Well, do you know if that kind of mechanism was discussed as part of this negotiation? And I know that the chairman's already alluded to this earlier, but in an interview today, Secretary Kerry implied that Iran deserves the benefits of the agreement they struck. Is there within that agreement some sort of understanding with Iran that we would be helpful to them in figuring out how to get access to the dollar, even if it is through a one-step removed process like the one I've outlined?
The agreement is clear in terms of what our commitments are, and we believe we've met those commitments. My understanding of the Secretary's remarks is that we have worked with U.S. Treasury and with banks to clarify what sanctions relief is and what banks are allowed to do in order to avoid any kind of punitive action for taking steps that are not permitted under the JCPOA. And so my understanding is that our efforts to ensure that Iran has access to assets that we have committed to release to them is really about ensuring that banks understand how that money can be accessed. It is not my understanding that there's anything beyond that.
Has the Department of State received instructions from the White House, or has the Department of State in any way signaled to Treasury that it needs to search for ways to allow Iran to get access to dollars through a mechanism that doesn't directly impact the transaction within a U.S. bank?
I have not received that instruction.
Well, again, I mean, the fundamental question here, I know you say it doesn't touch the dollar. I would just want to make this point for the record. By allowing a U.S. bank a general license to move this money offshore, it is in essence allowing them access to the U.S. dollar. It is not technically happening within the United States per se, but we know what that money is going to be used for. The general license would be used to provide liability protection to the U.S. bank, but the only reason why that money would be moving to an offshore entity, a clearinghouse, is so that Iran could get access to dollars. And I think this is an important point that we need to get some clarity on, whether, I guess it would be from Treasury. But that sort of mechanism has never been discussed with the Congress, from my understanding. And if it is, in fact, part of this agreement, we've never been notified of that as well. And I guess what I'm trying to get at the core of is, was there, and you're saying that your testimony here today is that that's not the case, but was there ever a moment, or is it part of this agreement that we would somehow help Iran get access to dollars in some way that did not violate the need to deal directly with the U.S. bank? And you've said here today that you're not aware of that ever being part of this agreement or conversation in any way.
Yeah, again, I did not take part in the negotiations of the agreement. but my reading of the agreement indicates otherwise.
One more point on access to the U.S. banking sector. This is not just about punitive action. It is also in the fact that even irrespective of the nuclear program, the Iranian banking sector has posed a hazard because of its laundering activities and so forth. Has Iran taken any actions to halt the use of its financial institutions for money laundering or for other illicit behavior?
My understanding is it's much more careful about which institutions it uses, but it still is engaged in money laundering activities that we attempt to block and stop.
All right, thank you.